And this is Putin's moment, because Putin is now being able to basically go to the Americans and say, look, I can help you with the oil resupply. And that's exactly what's now happened. So the US has lifted some of the sanctions that have been placed on Putin's oil supplies and also on some of the third countries like India who are using those oil supplies. Now, that obviously helps in terms of keeping the flow of oil to the world, which helps the world's economy, keeps gas prices down and everything goes there, but has a real effect on Ukraine and everything goes there. Russia is basically taking a bonus because Russia's oil, having been very much discounted before under the impact of the sanctions, has now increased significantly in price. So Putin's war chest, because the Strait of Hormuz has been closed, is growing. Putin's watching this very carefully, so he's got some advantage from the US is now very heavily engaged in this war. We don't know when that's going to finish, but they're very heavily engaged in it. He's also, Putin himself is to some extent stuck in Ukraine as well, unable to make any significant progress. But this does create a window of opportunity. And Landsbergis, who was the previous Lithuanian foreign secretary until 2024, who's been a very clear-sighted figure in looking at the threat that Putin has offered, says there is an opportunity now for Putin to exploit. Now, of course, one of the countries, one of the areas where he might choose to exploit is into the Baltics itself. Testing, pushing, or even potentially even trying to take over the Baltic countries. All along, still not really believing that NATO's Article 5 defences are as sound as they may seem. The Europeans are talking the talk about increasing defence expenditure, but that's not necessarily having an effect at the moment. And the Americans, the backstop, the support, the umbrella, whatever you want to describe it, of NATO, is now heavily engaged in this war in Iran. So there's an opportunity for Putin, if he so chose, to exploit in the Baltics and indeed other places as well. So in addition to the Baltics, which is obviously an area of vulnerability, we do know that the Russians are interested in what we call the High North, in other words, the Arctic. And an obvious point there is Svalbard. It's one of the reasons why the British have not deployed the aircraft carrier down into the Mediterranean. It's not just that Trump has said actually it's not required, but also there is genuine concern about Russia's promises or threats against the High North. And so the aircraft carrier, the British aircraft carrier, will be used as part of a carrier escort with a carrier group to move into the High North and provide some deterrence against Russian ambitions in that area as well. So we face an interesting phenomenon whereby a war in one part is starting to be linked to another through not only the issue of oil and oil flows and revenues that goes with it, but we've also seen Russia, for example, now providing intelligence and some tactical advice to the Iranians about how best to use their drones, learned from their experience against the Ukrainians. And on the other side, we've got the Ukrainians now providing support and advice to the Gulf countries on how to take down Iranian drones. So while it's a big way to say it, I mean, we've got ourselves into a situation where there is, if not necessarily World War III, something that starts to look not too dissimilar to it, operating two different theatres all at the same time, Ukraine and Iran. And in the meantime, we're looking up to the High North as well. That's a very big strategic and geopolitical problem to be dealing with. Iran, of course, is very conscious of its ability to choke the Strait of Hormuz and is developing a whole range of weapon systems in order to do that. We've known in the past they've had mines. We've also known that they've had these kind of swarms of what you might call updated motor torpedo boats, which can be very, very fast. We're talking about over 100 knots, which is really, really very fast indeed. But recently, what we've also seen is what you might call kamikaze boats, where they've got these boats which have got explosives, and these have been used against some of the vessels trying to transit through the Straits of Hormuz with some success. So the Iranians are going to exploit this for all they can. And it's one of the reasons why the Americans at the beginning of this war talked about destroying the Iranian Navy. And that didn't mean the sort of conventional Navy, but they also meant all the IRGC boats that they've got to choke the Strait of Hormuz. Russian involvement in this war is obviously of great interest to a lot of people, the intelligence side, trying to understand what's going on. It's probably not as much as the Iranians hoped for. When the Iranians basically began their alliance with Russia, there was lots of promises about sort of universal brotherhood and sort of a continual supply of weapons. And indeed, that was shown in the way in which Iran provided Russia initially with Iranian-produced Shahed drones, and then subsequently Iran helped Russia to build a sort of Shahed factory in Russia itself. But because of the way in which Russia's got itself so engaged and so focused on the war in Ukraine, it doesn't have a lot of resources available to provide a lot of physical support to the Iranians. But we do know they're providing intelligence, and we do know that they're providing, as I said, advice, technical advice to the Iranians as to what targets to employ and how best to use the drones against what they know are countermeasures, which the West has learned as a result of the fighting in Ukraine. So that is an ongoing issue at the moment. What I don't expect to see is necessarily direct military support by Russia to Iran, or even necessarily significant resupplies of ammunition or equipment from Russia to Iran either. I think that is probably, because of the limitations that Russia's got, probably going to be a step too far. The other country that's looking on at this whole conflict now and trying to work out whether this provides them an opportunity is China itself. We do know that China has ambitions to take Taiwan. We also know that the President Xi told his PLA, the People's Liberation Army, to be ready for 2027. The issue, therefore, is whether while the West is distracted in Iran and also in Ukraine, whether President Xi would take advantage of that. I'm not sure he will do it directly. I think the timelines will still be as they are. But I think what we can genuinely see is that they will use the excuse, if you like, of this Western intervention led by President Trump against Iran as a reason for them to use force against Taiwan if that should be necessary. Of course, what the Chinese want to happen is for Taiwan just to drop into their hands without fighting. But they're also prepared to fight, and they've been given a deadline as to when they need to be ready so to do. So I think they will use this and say, look, Iran was attacked by the US and by Israel because of what it regards as irrefutable good reasons geopolitically. They will do the same thing with Taiwan. What we have been able to see, of course, is a sort of widening of the war itself. Now, this should not be necessarily unexpected. One of the things that Iran created was this whole series of proxy forces, Hezbollah, Hamas, supported the Houthis in Yemen. But in Iraq and in Syria, it also sponsored a number of proxy forces there, basically to be used to distract and to attack Western bases, British and American bases in the fight against ISIS, and that's what they've done. So they attacked a base in northern Iraq near to Erbil, where a significant number of British and American forces are based, and they're all part of this campaign, mostly led by special forces against ISIS and other Islamist terror groups in the north of Iraq and Syria. Not unexpected that they should do this. Not least of which because Erbil is also in the Kurdish area of Iraq. And one of the concerns that Iran has is that Kurds from northern Iraq would move into the Iranian Kurdish side and start taking on the IRGC in that area. It's one of the more obvious scenarios that people are playing out at the moment when people talk about boots on the ground. It's where the Kurdish Peshmerga from northern Iraq would move into Iranian Kurdistan and begin a fight against the IRGC. So that's also part of this.